Lurking, a subject where players misplay a lot. We lurk very often on attackers, but sometimes we do win positions on defenders, and with this in mind, you'll also be able to flank, aka defenders lurk. This subject is for attackers, but you can also apply some of the principles on defenders. However, we will cover that on flanking. We'll give you principles that if you follow, you'll end up having a lot of impact with your lurk, carrying it even sometimes just with information, and by this I mean map control, calling rotations for your teammates, calling where enemies are, or just by getting picks on map and making a lot of pressure to the enemy, since if you lurk like a Radiant, they won't know what to do. Game plan. When you are lurking, it is really important to communicate with your teammates your game plan before the round starts, and even calling them out to play slow. Not doing this is a common mistake that will end up getting you a mid pick in the best case scenario, but that's not being impactful, or very little impact, since your teammates are already all dead or they had the site already. You won't be able to control how the game flows by lurking this way. Playing last contacts. Another common mistake players do is to play first contact when lurking. Listen, unless you heard an enemy rotating and you have a timing, being the first to play in the round will get you caught most of the time. If nothing happens, nothing happens. By this, if no one on your team is doing any pressure, it's most likely for the enemies to stay still. You want them to create pressure so that you can play, which brings us to one of my most fundamental principles on lurking. Whenever something happens, there's a reaction. Whenever there's a gunshot, a smoke falling, a recon dart, a kill, pressure from a team, people tend to move. Sometimes you can even catch people looking at their minimaps. When something happens, most of the time there's a reaction. If you wait just a bit, you'll hear someone moving if someone's close, using their abilities to recon, someone shift walking to you cause they want to flank your team, and if you are not doing the same path over and over or constantly lurking, you can presume that the spot you are winning is most likely empty after a few brief seconds. Making pressure. Let's say that you have been lurking for 2 rounds, round 1 and round 3. If you now understand when to lurk, you'll know that enemies might be suspicious about your lurking in round 4. Something you can do is to put a killjoy tower close to the barrier of the opposite side your team is executing, or a deep camera to make a presence feel nice, and instantly rotate to your teammates. This way, you'll delay rotations and outsmart your enemies, making them think that you are around. Knowing when to lurk and how to lurk. As we mentioned before, it is really important to not constantly lurk and take different paths when you do so. If you're lurking all the time, enemies will start expecting it. My suggestion to lurking is that if you do in early rounds, enemy will always be very cautious about your lurking in future rounds. So with just small pressure and not giving away your presence to the enemy team on the minimap, you can stack with your teammates and you'll be able to trade them and at the same time delay rotations with simply mind games of enemies not knowing that you are lurking. In this game, Cloud successfully executed that strategy against NRG. You can see Sage and Sky having a delayed rotation due to being afraid of Viper lurking, since that's how Les played in previous rounds, allowing Loud to rotate through teleports. When you lurk, you want to make sure that you are using a different path and winning different zones. If you are predictable when it comes to lurking, enemies will punish you if they see what you did in previous rounds. The trick is to always adapt once you get spotted, or adapt if you already did that 2 times, which can be obvious, even when you are not spotted. If you are getting into C on Haven, you must have come from somewhere, and the 2 most likely paths will be either double doors or C long. Lurk to gain information, map control. Another benefit of lurking is that if you get into deep positions, you'll hear enemy rotations. With this, you can easily call out your team on what to do mid-round. If you hear someone rotating from C, and if you have information from previous rounds that there's only one player playing there, you can call your teammates to rotate through C long while you intercept the enemies when they rotate to C again. It's important to call out for your teammates when something isn't clear. Remember, it's not your job to clear everything. Just make sure that your teammates know that there is a possibility of someone being there so that they don't get caught. Having deep map control is always a plus. Even if the round is won, without much lurk impact, you can find some patterns from the enemy team and come out with a good game plan for the next round. You'll also have multiple options mid-round: flanking, calling out a rotation, being aware of how enemies are playing, or finding a pick. Trigger discipline. Sometimes when you have deep positions, you'll see enemies passing through you. Sometimes you can let them go and pass information to your teammates, while you get the rotation off guard if enemies are not expecting it. In other cases, if you hear multiple enemies, you can let one pass to secure two, or sometimes if they are close, get both of them. Difference between lurking and finding a pick. When you are lurking, it's important to not give away your presence unless you are making pressure and trying to challenge the enemy to get a pick. When you are finding a pick, making presence or playing stealth are both fine, since you are not trying to get to the position, but simply getting the pick. If you do play stealth trying to find the pick, but you see that there's a timing to get into a deep position, you can always adapt and change the plan. You can ask a teammate to go with you while you play first. Making step noise, shooting, or abilities such as Killjoy Molly to get someone out of a corner, a Cypher camera to clear corners, a Cypher cage to get a timing, etc. This might get the enemy to try to punish you, and if you have someone with you while you bait him, you will most likely succeed getting a pick. Even if you die 50% of the time, your teammate should have your back the other 40%. Remember that sometimes playing stealth gets you the pick, other times giving away your position to challenge the enemy will. You have to adapt depending on your intuition and what you think is best. Enemies being on an eco round. When it comes to enemies being on eco rounds, you want to play with your teammates unless you think that the enemy team is stacking, which is very rare in matchmaking. If you get caught up lurking, you'll give away a gun to your enemies, and they can be round changing sometimes. You will also be one man down to trade teammates when executing, and since you are on buy and them on eco, you'll have a huge advantage executing, since they don't have the same guns and abilities as your team does. You can see that in this round, Loud ends up losing 3 weapons due to individual duels without abilities, which caused their economy to be heavily damaged. Don't forget that at the start, you might get caught sometimes lurking, but this is part of the process. You learn and you improve. Going over the limits you know might cost you a round or two, but will definitely improve your lurking skills in the long run. Besides, you now know the principles of the best lurkers in the game, which is a massive help for having a big impact while lurking.